الآن يمكنكم المشاركة في مبادرة الأيام الرقمية تحت شعار انطلق بقوة مع جوجل، والتي يتناول فيها خبراء جوجل عناوين جديدة أسبوعيا مثل السحابيات، مهارات من جوجل، أندرويد، فلتر، ذكاء الآلة، فايربيس، ديزاين ثينكينج، مقسمة إلى دورات وورشات عمل يومية بالإضافة إلى مسابقات أسبوعية. شاهد الأيام الرقمية مباشرة على اليوتيوب وشارك رأيك وأسئلتك مع خبراء جوجل، واحصل على شهادة حضور في كل محاضرة تشترك فيها. هذا وأكثر من الأحد إلى الخميس ابتداء من الساعة 9 بتوقيت دبي عبر الرابط المبين youtube.com/gdgmena.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. صحة فطوركم أزول الأول. أهلا بكم في عدد جديد من أعداد MENA ديجيتال دايز. معكم عليان عبد النور جي دي جي تيزي وزو الجزائر، وسأكون بإذن الله معكم خلال الساعة القادمة، أين سنتعلم أشياء جديدة كالعادة عن الكلاود وعن أشياء أخرى عن الكمبيوتر. يعني حتى وإذا كنتم في بداية مشواركم فمعنا بإذن الله ستتعلمون أشياء. وطبعا الشانل ليس فقط هذه السيشن، لكن هناك سيشنز أخرى بالعربي بالإنجليزي حتى بالديالكت، يعني باللهجة المصرية بالسعودية بالجزائرية. يوجد العديد من الفيديوهات حول الكثير من التوبكس يمكنكم الاطلاع عليها. معايا بإذن الله سنتعلم أشياء عن الكلاود، واليوم بإذن الله سنتكلم عن لغة برمجة البايثون. السيشن ستكون بالإنجليزي، لكن إذا كانت لديكم أي أسئلة يمكنكم طرحها. أزول في الأول. Good evening everyone. صحة فطوركم. I'm Aliane Abdenour, GDG Tiziuzu from Algeria. I will be with you within this hour where we are going to talk about cloud computing, and we are going to see what is Python, how we are going to use it. And of course, this is not the only session. There will be other sessions, but we will try to go step by step by the basics. So the basic is the programming language, and then there are many theoretical and practical stuff that we are going to see in each sessions. And of course, this is not the only session I'm doing. My friends are doing wonderful stuff too. They speak about Flutter, about Android, about machine learning, about neural networks, TensorFlow, design thinking, everything. You just need to check about the channel and you will find all the playlists you need. So of course, if you have any questions, you can ask them in the chat, and then we will try and we will do our best to answer on them. So before we will dive on Google Python, the series talks about Google Cloud, but why we are going to talk about Python? If you were here in the last sessions, we talked about Linux. And now we are going to talk about Python, because we are going to go step by step from zero to hero. That means that even if you don't know the basic stuffs, we are going to try and help you to get those basics, and then we go to the cloud, because cloud this is exactly what you do on your laptop, and doing stuff in your laptop offline. When you need to scale, when you don't need to use your own machine, you go somewhere. This somewhere is called the cloud. That's why we are going to see all those basics, and then once we go to the cloud, it will be easier. So Python, everyone is talking about Python. This is the trend, but it was not the trend 10 years ago. Now everyone is talking about Python because Python is more used in machine learning, and in the past, when you ask someone about web development, he will directly answer PHP. And if you go to the advanced people, you will find, for example, Java or Ruby on Rails. But Python, this is like, if you find someone using Python, this is more about Django. And then there is a wonderful micro framework that we will see in the next session, which is called Flask, because what we are going to do in our introduction, this is what we are going to apply in Google Cloud, because I want you to understand Google Cloud using the basic tools that you use every day. So Python, this is just a programming language. So now why we need programming language? So I need you to understand some basic stuffs, and then we move on. So we are here. So this is, by the way, this is called Jamboard. This is free. You can use it. This is like a digital whiteboard. So you can explain stuff using Jamboard. So I am here and the machine is here. I need a way to talk to the machine, and the machine needs a way to give me results. So the problem is that the machine is built on top of electricity, 1 and 0. So to be able to talk to the machine using 1 and 0, it will be really difficult. And this is possible, and this is what we call assembly. Assembly, this is the language where we are going to talk to the CPU registries, where it's really a low level. So, for example, MASM, this is an assembly language where we are going to go deeper, but this is not made for anyone. So then people try to make it simpler. So the assembly, they built something on top of assembly and they name it C. And this is the C language. But other people said C is difficult. So that's why other people went to Java. This is like escaping what was difficult. So let me undo this. Okay. So people escaped to Java, but they wanted something related to C. So what happened? Someone created a new language on top of C, and he called it Python. And he made it in a way that it will be really easier, because this is useless to create a new language while it's difficult. So why do we need to create something on top of C if it's difficult too? So what he did, he tried to create the most understood, the most easiest language ever. And of course, this is not the case. There will be other language, but right now, Python, why it's easy? Because this is like a pseudocode. A pseudocode. This is not, this is something like, hey, I want to write A, B, and C. And this is what we call a pseudocode. We don't care how it's written. We don't care if it's more for a programmer. This is like, I just need a paper and a pen, and I write my idea like a code. So this is not a real code, this is a pseudocode. So Python, he tried to do this philosophy, where writing a code, we don't need the famous, if you are a programmer, you know what I mean. You need to end your line with this, and then we are going to see what happened. He doesn't need this and this, the braces. So we are going to see all of this. So the idea behind Python is to make a language that is affordable for people. That's why Python, it's people teach Python for kids. Why? To prepare them for the programming. We don't teach them C, because C is really advanced. And Java, people hate Java, because Java, this is like, this is the object-oriented. We are going to see all of us. So the first idea, Python, this is like I'm reading something in English. No this sign, no sign, no this one, but we will find them somewhere. And then Python, this is what we call, let me create a new one. In programming language, we have a compiled language, compiled programming language, and we have the interpret programming language. So the compiled programming language, the good news is that it's really fast. So we have a code, we compile it, we get an executable. Or for example, this for Windows, but in Linux we have other format. And that's what we call a binary. And the binary, we don't need to re-execute the code again. We just execute the binary. But the bad news is that we need to go on an object code which destroys this source code. So we cannot go back. So to go back, we do what hackers do. This is what we call disassembly. So let me disassemble. So remember 5 minutes ago, we said the assembly language. So we go back to the assembly language and we try to check how we are going to modify. So the C code, it doesn't exist anymore. But the interpreted code, we have, for example, PHP, or of course, we are going to talk about the Python. We got a result without getting a binary code result. The good news is that I can go back and modify my code if there are errors and execute only what I need. That's why the compiled code, it executes everything before we get the result. But the interpreted code, we execute only the lines or one line that we need. What does it mean is that if we have A, B, C, and then we have an error here in an interpreted code, we can get the result from here. But in compiled code, even if we have a result from A and B and C, there is an error, we cannot get A and B. That's why interpreted code, you can find them named scripts. Why we name them scripts? This is like from movies, a scenario. When we give a script to an actor and then he does an A and then he does a B and then in C he makes a mistake, we don't need to repeat A and B. We just go to C and repeat it until he wins. So that's why we call it script language. So the good news in scripted language, they are a higher level. What does it mean is that if I go to the example earlier, as a human, I need something at a higher level, but as a machine, it needs something at a lower level. This is electricity. This is our eyesight. This is our human understanding. So when we are human, we always try to get something higher level. When it's a machine, it's a low level. But there is something that we need to understand. The more it's near the lower level, the faster it is. And the higher it is, the slower it is. So remember this. But now, in 2022, the machine is fast. So why do we need to optimize our code? This is in the past. People tried and did their best to optimize the code because they were restricted to lower level. But now our machines are strong enough. In the past, you can find, for example, 4 kilo-octet of RAM, but now we have 1 tera of RAM, and you can find it easier. So why we cannot use this? So what happened? People don't care about how fast the code it is. People only care about if it works or not, and then go to the optimization. So the first thing we need, does it work or not? Once it works, then we can optimize our code. But in the past, they didn't even care about optimization. It must work, because working means optimized, because they were forced to go to the registry. So in the script language, we have Python, we have PHP, we have Perl, and we have script shell. The script shell, this is the commands we type in Linux, and then we group them in a file and execute them. And command 1, command 2, command 3, and so on. And this is the same thing as Python. Now, what is the difference between a script shell and a Python? The script shell, it uses commands. That means that every command, this is a process, which means that you will use a lot of RAM. But when you use a programming language like Python, you optimize your final result. So script shell, this is to automate something using already existed commands on Linux. But Python, this is to write a whole program from scratch. So Python, this is interpreted, this is called script. And Python, the good news, the other good news, I keep saying good news because it works on Windows and it works on Linux. But why we say C? C also works on Windows and in Linux. When you hear something about a language, that doesn't mean that it will not work on Windows and Linux. That means that the result will work on Windows and it work on Linux. But when we use C, we can program C in Windows and we can program C in Linux. But the result, it's not the same. In Windows, we get a different binary than Linux, than Mac, and so on. But in Python, since we are just porting the code, we can execute it anywhere, of course, with some restriction. Don't believe that it works everywhere. There are some restrictions like networks and all that are going to go, we will dive with time. So the other thing about Python is there are two major versions. There is Python 2 and there is Python 3, which are not compatible. Python 2 is not completely different, compatible with Python 3, and Python 3 it's not compatible with Python 2. That's what we are going to see in a few minutes. So this is our small introduction, and let's talk now about the details. So Python, let's quit this and let's start from scratch. So let me zoom. I think this is it clear for everyone? Does the text works for everyone? I think it's good. Okay, so Python, let's make a big news about this. When you hear people saying Python works on Windows and Linux, you need to get some restriction. The first one and the most important one is that when you install Python on Windows, you should forget this, the philosophy when you install it in Linux. Why? Because in Linux, it already comes with Linux. Why it comes? It's not because this is a bonus, because a lot of tools on Linux, they depend on Python. So why do I make this important notice? Because if you go to the website python.org, which is the official website, you don't just go and download the latest version and install it on your machine if you are in Linux, because you can break your system Python and you can have a lot of problems. There are even your machine can stop working because there are many tools that depend on Python. But on Windows, that's fine. Since it doesn't come with Python, it's not depending on it. You just need to download Python, the latest one, and you practice. So what you will have when you have Linux, you need to check which version you have on your Linux. So if I come here, I have Pop OS, this operating system, it's called Pop OS. As you can see, this is just a GNOME interface. So that's called Pop OS. It's built on top of Ubuntu. And the good thing about it is that it works on NVIDIA. So if you have NVIDIA and Optimus, if you have a laptop with NVIDIA, just go with Pop OS, it will work perfectly. So with Pop OS, it comes with 3.8, which is not the latest version. Because if I come to the Python website and then go to download, you will see that the latest version is 3.10. This is not even 3.9. So I'm 2 versions behind. But as you can see, there is a long time support because Python, there are many tools that depends on it. So when you install Linux the first time, you will have a default Python. So be careful to not upgrade it. Leave it as it is. Now, someone tells me, hey, I want to use Python, but I want to download the latest version. That's fine. What you do, you go, you download the latest one. I just come here. So let me come here. I download this one. I run my download. And here is how you are going. So to quit this console, you just hit Control D. Control D in Linux, this is end of line, end of file. So this is like you are ending because we said in Linux, everything is a file. So you just tell Linux end the file you are writing right now. So I prepared the folder. So I downloaded the latest Python. So what you need to do, let me do this. You need to decompress this file. So here is the trick. You just type file. File, this is to understand what is the nature of this file. So it tells that this is an XZ compressed data. In Linux, you don't have only zip or rar. You have other algorithms like XZ, like gzip, and all that. So what I need to tar. This is when you find tar, this is a folder. Because in Linux, you cannot compress a folder. You need to tar a folder and then compress it. And in Windows, as we said in last sessions, there are many things Windows make it opaque for the user because the user doesn't need to understand all that stuff. But in Linux, since it's professional, it must be transparent. You need to do everything by yourself. So we need to tar to untar. So we need to tell him X to extract. And then we need to use the G for the XZ. By the way, if you want to get all of them, you just do manual. Once you get here, you type slash. So as you can see, when I typed slash, I got something here. And then you type XZ. So if I want to extract something from XZ, I just use G capital or XZ. To quit, I hit the Q. So I tell him tar, I want to extract using the XZ algorithm, and I want the file, and I want to be variables. I want to see the result, or I just hide the variables. And then I tell him I want this file. I wait a little bit because I hide the V, I don't see the result. And then I got this folder. It got extracted. So you come to this folder, and then here is what you will have. You will have a file called configure, and this is the first thing you need to run when you want to compile something on Linux. So you do /configure, and then you hit enter. It starts doing its job. It will take a time. I will stop it. I just need you to understand. You just go to Google and type how to compile Python on Linux, and you will get all the steps. And then you do make, because this is a C. As you can see, this is a C language, C code. It's programmed on C. So once you do make, it will compile, and then you need to do another step. So let me run this to make it easier for you. You do make and sudo make, and here, be careful. Don't do this. If you want to do this, you need to configure and add another argument and tell him install it somewhere else. But here, the best thing you want to do and to be safe is to do Alt install. Alt install, what it does, it will install it, but not on the previous Python. It will install it in another place, which will not delete your system Python. So be careful. Always use this trick. It will really help you. So once you do that, it will install a new Python. And once you install it, you will find that you don't have only one Python. You will have a Python 3 and a Python 3.10. So if I type Python, So if I type Python 3.10, I got the latest Python. Yeah, and here we are. I am in the latest Python. To quit, I just hit Ctrl D. And if I want to use Python 2, I have another version. So I installed Python 2 just to show you the difference between the Python 2 and Python 3, which are not the same. So let's do that. Let's clear this. Let me run. So let me come back to the Python 3. And before you do this, always check which is the Python by default. So you just run which Python. If you get something like this, that means that your Python, either it's 2 or 3, but the command Python, this is an alias. So you just need to do this. Type Python. What is Python? What is this keyword Python? So it tells you Python is an alias for Python 3. That means that the system default in my Pop OS, this is Python 3. So if I do Python which Python 3, it gives you where is the executable of Python 3. If I do which Python 2, it tells me here is where you installed Python 2, here is where you installed Python 3. That's why I told you when you compile a new version of Python, always use alt install to avoid deleting the old the system Python. So now let's run first Python 3 or Python 2 here. Let's split this screen. By the way, this is like Terminator. For people like Kali Linux, they use Terminator. I'm using Tilix. This is the same thing. This is an easier way. And here, let me run Python 2. Let me zoom. And let me rename this. So this, I will put it Python 2. Make it easier later. And this one, let me rename it Python 3. Okay. So it will be here Python 3 and Python 2. So if I double click here, I will get the full Python 2 console. I double click again and I get it back. So Python 2 or 3, you just need to do this. So if you want to print A, so Python, this is what we call a dynamically typed language. What does it mean? It means that you don't need to specify the type of your variable. You don't need to do something like int a, and then you initialize a by 2. You just need to assign a variable, and then it understands which variable. And this is what we call it dynamic typed. Why? Because I can change a to something like this, hello, and it will accept. So if I do print A, I will get this, which is the good thing about dynamically typed language, but it's bad in the other hand. What does it mean? That if you do an application, web application, you need to control this by your own. The system will not control it. It will not force the type. Imagine you want to do something like this. Here is the danger. 1 plus 1. This is integer plus integer. But I have a problem, is that this plus, this is an ambiguous operation. That means that if I do 1 like this plus 1, it will do concatenation, which means that if you have, for example, a banking application and then you ask people to upload the new values, they will get rich in 1 second. So you need to control, double check. You need to control by your own, because if it was a statically typed language, when you force 1 to be integer and you try to do this operation, it will reject it, because it tells him, hey, I need this one to be integer, not a string. So this is the first thing. The second thing, contrary Java, for people coming from JavaScript, they can't do this. They concatenate a string with an int. And what happens, it takes it as a string. In Python, you cannot do this. And this is what we call a strongly typed language. In JavaScript, this is called a weakly typed language. Weakly typed, that means that you can mix the types and that's fine. But in strongly typed language, you cannot do that. Even either in Python 2 or Python 3, it's impossible. So to get what you have, always use type, something like this. So if I do type and then 1, it tells me this is an integer. This is an integer. This is an integer. But if I do this, it tells me this is a string. And here is one important thing. As you can see, let me show you something. Let me do this and then do that and do that. This is something important you need to understand about Python. Python, everything is an object. So if you come from Java to Python, the difference is that both of them, they are OOP. They are object-oriented programming language. But the difference, in Java, they force you to declare the object with private and public and all that breaking heads. But in Python, you program as it's C or Pascal. You don't need to declare the object, but the object itself, as long as you initialize it, it's an object. So everything in Python, they are objects. So Python, this is an object-oriented programming language, but they don't force you to use the OOP paradigm. You can program using the old C or Pascal way. So, which is we call the imperative way. So here, what I do, if I do something like this, length 5, as you can see, length, it doesn't work not on 5, but on int. That means that what happened here is, let me explain you this because I need you guys to understand those concepts. So when I do 5, when I type 5, oops, here, okay. So when I do A, why it doesn't write? Okay. What's going on? Okay. Let me refresh. Okay. And clear frame. Okay. So if I do A equals 5, what happens is that I did something like this. A, it inherited from integers. And once it inherited, I inherited something else, 5. And this is why we say that Python, this is an OOP. So all methods that we use on int, the class int, we can use them on A because we initialize it as 5. So he guessed that 5, this is an int using a regex, regular expression. He didn't find the code, he didn't find the dot. So that means that this is, and it's from 0 to 9. That means that it must be an integer. So Python do all that stuff for you. That's why we say Python, it's an easy language, programming language. Okay, now let's go to some differences between Python 2 and Python 3. And the first thing you will find is like this, print A. So print in Python 2, it was a statement. If this is like this, if this is what we call statement, but you can declare it like this. And this looks like a function, which is not a function in Python 2 by default. But in Python 3, if I come here and do a equals 5, and then do print 5, it tries to mimic, sorry, I was here, I think, sorry, I was in Python 3. What I did, I want Python 3, not Python 2. Okay, sorry for this. So if I do a equals 5, and then I do print 5, I get an error. Why? Because print in Python 3, it's a function. But in Python 2, this is a statement. So what we do in Python 2, we do this from future import. And we tell him import the print function, but I will leave this in the next session. This is like something advanced where we are going to talk about imports. Anyway, so the print, why we need this? Because when we declare a function, so a function in Python, we can declare it something like this, def, hello, parentheses, and then we hit enter. Now, here is something you need to understand about Python. In C and PHP, we do something like this, the braces. But in Python, we don't use braces, we use 4 spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we do return. For example, hello, MENA, digital days. So if I do hello and call it, it writes hello, MENA digital days. So in Python, every time we use a function, if, while, for loop, we don't use braces, we use 4 spaces. So the 4 spaces, this is what we call indentation. Indentation. So Python uses the indentation, which is equivalent in other languages for the braces. And that's why there is a joke in Python. So if I do from future import braces, it tells me not a chance. That means that never ever expect to have the braces in Python. But we have braces somewhere, and this is what we call a dictionary. Why we talk about the dictionary? Because we need them in the JSON. When we will work on the cloud, we need the JSON. So here is what we call a dictionary. So this is like hello, and we have 5. Okay, and we have, for example, 10. So if we want to take to get the hello value, we just do something like this, a hello. And this is what you know in JavaScript as a JSON. So the JSON in Python, this is called a dictionary, a dict. And we have a list, which is a, we run it like this. So hello, 0, and we can mix anything. And if we want to get the 0, we just do a, and we give it the index. The index here, it starts always with 0. So in Python, indexes start with 0, not like MATLAB. MATLAB, I think they start with 1. Pascal too. So in Python, they start with 0 like other modern language. Same thing with JavaScript. So if you know JavaScript, it will be really easy for you to go to Python. Now, why I talked about all of this? Because in print statement, we cannot do this def hello. And then we do 1, 2, 3, 4. Please don't use tabs. You can use tabs, but don't use them. Always use spaces, because when we go to Kubernetes with YAML files, they don't use tabs. They always use spaces. And then if I do return print a, I will get an error, because a function cannot return a statement. But in Python 3, if I do def hello, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, return print hey, and I validate, it will work. So always use functions. So if you want to use the function, here is the solution. Since we talked about future, I go to the future. That means that I go to Python 3 and I import print function. Now, if I do this, it will work, because now print is not a statement anymore. This is a function. So remember. And of course, you cannot import anything from future. There are only few stuff like print and with, all that we can check them with future in other sessions. So now let me talk about the most important thing here, which is the language. The most important difference, this is how they treat the strings. So let me do print or something like this, a equal or word equal hello. So if I do print word, that works. Why? Easily, because it is in English, and this is what we call ASCII. But the problem, if we try to write something in Arabic, so if I change the language, Assalamu alaikum, and then I try to do print, it will work too. But let me create a file and execute it. So let me copy this and let me generate a new window, new tab here, MENA, and then let's nano hello.py. The extension on Python, this is called py for Python. Let me zoom something like this. And here, let me just do this and then print hello. Print word, sorry. I want to print this keyword. By the way, there is no this sign, if you know it, because people keep debugging and then they say, I forgot it. It doesn't exist in Python, so you are safe. But there is something important you need to understand. End of line, this is not the same in Windows. This is not the same in Linux, and this is not the same in Mac. So you need to convert your end of line. So in case you take your code from Windows and try to execute it in Linux, guarantee that your end of line, this is Linux. I think all editors convert it by default. So just remember this. So let me save this. And if I do Python 2, I want to execute it with Python 2. Hello. There we are. It tells me you have an error. What is this error? Is that I have a no ASCII character, because ASCII, this is those English letter, but I put some no ASCII letter and it will not work. But if I execute it with Python 3, it will run. So the most important difference is that Python 3, it's fully Unicode. But Python 2, this is byte string. Let me explain you this. I need you to understand this because a lot of people struggle with this problem. So let me clean this. So if I come to Word and then equal, let's use this French character, because this is not an ASCII character, or let's use an Arabic one, alif. So if I do type word, it tells me this is a string. So let's have the same thing here. Copy and paste it in Python 3. And let's do the same thing. Type word. It tells it's string. But if I sorry. Okay, so if I do word dot encode, it tells me I have a problem. So let me explain you another thing. So in a computer, the words that we see, they are just a bunch of 1 and 0. Because I'm using a double screen, that's why I think I have this bug. Okay, so let me generate a new one. So in computer, we only have this. And those are bytes. So of course they are bits, and then they are grouped to become bytes. So a string, this is something like this. This is A, this is B, and this is C. Just an example. This is not really what it does. But we need to understand how we are going to read those bytes into something that we understand. And this is what we call an encoding. So when we tell him that we are encoding it using ASCII, it tries to regroup them something like this. But when we tell them we are regrouping them using UTF-8, for example, it regroups them in another way. So the encoding, this is the way how we are telling our bytes to be grouped. This is the simplest way to understand them. So in Python, let me come back here. They are encoded in string. So if I do something like this and tell him UTF-8, decode, sorry. So if I want to use this word, I need to add U. In Python 2, always add the U before the keyword. Why? Because if you tell him, I need the type of this word, it tells me now this is Unicode. But in Python 3, if I do the same thing and I add the U here, and I tell him what is the type of this word, by default, it's Unicode. So there is no more something called Unicode, because by default, str is Unicode. But in Python 2, the byte string, this is like this. The byte string, because they are like this. So by default, every time you declare something in Python 2, they are byte string. So if I do type word, now the str, that doesn't mean string, they are byte string. But in Python 3, if I want to change the default, I need to use B. So be careful. Each time you want to send something in the network in Python 3, you need to convert it to byte string. And to do that, I just need to do the same thing like this. And I do word dot. Now, if I try the function decode, it doesn't work. Why? Because decode, it needs a byte string. So here I need encode. So encoding in Python 3, you will always use it. So when I send this character in the network, I always need to encode it. Why? Encoding something like this, by default, you are doing this, UTF-8. is the same. So remember, of course, you will not face this in real life, but in case you will get those bugs, remember, Python 3, this is Unicode, which is the best for our use because we speak Arabic, we use French, we use Amazigh, we use a lot of languages. So the best, this is Unicode. But in Python 2, it uses byte string. So the byte string, that means that they are bytes. But in Python 3, they are letters. They are like, they make it easier for us. But if we want to send them in the network, we need to convert them and encode them. So this is the first thing you need to understand. Now, if I want to execute the file I got the error earlier, so if I come to GDG MENA and then to execute Python 2, my file, which is hello, it will not run. So how to correct this? You just need to come to your file, if you are in Python 2, and add this line. So you just need to do this, and then code in, and then you write UTF-8. Something easier. You just write this because this means comment, but when it's found with coding at the beginning of the file, it has a meaning. This is the same as shebang. So this is the shebang, like this, and then you do /bin/bash. You always find this. See something like open with, what we know in Windows, execute it with bin bash. So if I want to execute it now, I leave, and then Python 2, it will work. So each time you are in Python 2, remember, by default, you are using ASCII. So in case you have Arabic, you need to convert it and tell him explicitly, I'm using Unicode. But in Python 3, everything is fine. Unless you get some error here, you need to think to convert it to byte string using the encode and decode. It depends what you want. Okay, what time is it? Okay, 10 minutes. So if you have any questions, because we have many other stuff that I need to explain later. So do you have any questions before we move on? Any questions? Okay, if you have any questions, please ask them. Waiting for them. I will go. We'll continue. So let me leave this, and I'm here in Python 2. By the way, always you will know that you are in Python when you have those three signs. This is to make it different that you are not in the console. You are always in. So this is like here, I'm in the console. It depends on your configuration. And here I'm inside Python. So let me exit this. And let me exit that. And let me exit that too. Let me go outside of Python, cd gdg MENA. So earlier, I told you that you should never execute a new version of Python because you can erase your old system Python. So you can install another version by compiling it in a different place. But we don't do that in real life. In real life, we create a virtual environment. This is equivalent to what we know now by the containers. This is like the early version of a container, of Docker. So in the past, what we do, if we want to execute something in a safe place, why? Because if we want to install a new library, we do pip install my library, something like this. So pip this is equivalent to npm for people coming from Node.js. But pip, it will install the library to the system, which can break your system too. Because if you have, for example, library version 0.1 and then you install a new version, which is 0.5, it can break your system library. That's why what we do, we create an environment, a new virtual environment. How we are doing this? You just need to do, if you are in Python 3, you do Python 3-m for module, and then venv for virtual environment, and you give him the name, for example, MENA DD. What it does, it creates a folder that is called MENA DD. Sorry. So here is the folder, and inside the folder, if I come here, I do tree or ls, you will have a new sandboxed version of Python. Even the path of Python, it will be changed. So if I do which Python 3, here, this is the system Python 3. But if I do now source bin /activate, because I'm inside the folder, what happens if I redo which Python 3, as you can see, this is not the system Python. This is a new sandboxed Python. And then I can work safely here. And here I can do pip install my library. And it will bring a new library, but inside this folder and not in my system folder. This is important. Now, if you end your work, you just need to do deactivate, like this. Deactivate, if I do which Python 3, it will disable your virtual environment. So we will see all of that in the next session. And by the way, if you have an old version of Python or you find an old tutorial, they don't use the venv, they use this virtual env. It was called like this, virtual env, and then they do something like that. Now, this is the same thing. When you do virtual env or Python 3-m venv, you will create a new folder called something. And then if I do cd something, I will find the same thing. So if I want to enable this, that's fine. Now, if I do deactivate, it will disable this virtual environment. So why we need this? Because I can do, yeah, by the way, I didn't enable it to deactivate it. So if I do cd and then here, let me show you something. When you do, since I have two versions, I do which Python 3 and which Python 3.10. If I do this trick, Python 3.10-m venv, and then new Python, it will create a new environment, a sandbox environment with my newly installed and compiled Python. And this is the best way to use the virtual environment. So if I do new Python, so source, new Python, bin, activate. Now, if I do which Python, it tells me you are using this Python. And if I do Python version, it tells me you are using the latest one. So I will work on this Python without touching my system Python. This is the generalities. And of course, this is not the only session. There will be other session about Python. This is just a simple introduction, even if I went deeper, but I want you to understand those basics. So do you have any questions? We are at 1 hour. I think I did the most important stuff. So do you have questions before we close it? Okay, so I think that, yeah, we did it at this time because, like we say, نحن في السهرة، في سهرات رمضان. في الجزائر حاليا هي 10 مساء، ربما في دبي هي 1 صباحا. نعتذر عن التأخير. We are sorry about this. So if you have any questions, if you don't have, so as we say in Algeria, صحة سحوركم, and thank you very much. See you soon, inshallah.